Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into one of the most critical and honestly most misunderstood periods in all of American history. We're talking about the brief, brilliant, and ultimately heartbreaking era of radical Reconstruction.
You'd think the end of the Civil War in 1865 was, well, the end of the story, right? But the shooting war stopping, that was just the beginning of the real fight. The question wasn't just about rebuilding cities. It was about whether you could rebuild an entire nation on a foundation that had been completely broken by slavery.
So out of all that destruction, this incredible, truly revolutionary idea starts to take hold in Washington. Not just to end slavery, that was the first step, but to build a brand new multiracial democracy with equality for all citizens literally written into the Constitution.
And look, this was not some minor tweak. In just 5 years, Congress pushes through 3 world-changing amendments. First, the 13th, which makes slavery illegal, period. Then the 14th, which is huge. It establishes birthright citizenship and guarantees every citizen equal protection under the law. And then the 15th, which says you can't deny someone the right to vote because of their race. This was a total constitutional reset.
And then, in 1868, the American people send the Union's greatest war hero, Ulysses S. Grant, to the White House. His election was seen as a massive green light from the nation. It was a mandate saying, okay, take this new promise of equality and make it real. Enforce it.
You can just imagine, right? For the people who had fought so hard for civil rights, this felt like the moment they'd been waiting for. The president before Grant, Andrew Johnson, he'd fought against these changes every step of the way. So with Grant in charge, it really seemed like a new day had dawned, one where the government was finally on the side of freedom.
Okay, so Grant gets into office, and he isn't just going to sit back and write proclamations. No, his presidency was all about action. He was determined to use the full power of his office to defend this new, more equal America.
And you know what? For a brief, shining moment, it was actually working. With the protection of federal law, African Americans grabbed a hold of their new rights. They were voting, they were organizing, and they were winning elections, all the way from local sheriffs right up to the U.S. Senate. This dream of a multiracial democracy was actually happening.
But that kind of incredible progress, well, it provoked an equally incredible backlash. A new kind of war began, one fought in the shadows, by secret societies whose only goal was to bring back white supremacy. And the most infamous of them all, of course, was the Ku Klux Klan.
Now, it's really important to get the scale of this. The Klan wasn't just some fringe hate group. By the early 1870s, it had ballooned into a massive paramilitary force of around 500,000 members, mostly ex-Confederates, all dedicated to one thing: terror.
And their method was as simple as it was vicious. Violence. They systematically targeted black leaders, teachers, anyone trying to build a new community. They burned schools and churches to the ground. They used lynchings to intimidate people away from the polls and to tear down the new Republican state governments. But Grant refused to let this stand. He saw the Klan for exactly what it was, a domestic terrorist group. So he goes to Congress and demands the power to fight them. And the result is a series of laws we now call the Force Acts. These laws basically gave the president the authority to use the military to crush the Klan and protect people's right to vote. And Grant didn't just get these powers. He used them. He declared martial law in the most violent parts of the South, sent in the troops, and started making mass arrests. And it worked. By 1872, the first Klan was basically broken. This proved something absolutely crucial. When the federal government truly committed its power, Reconstruction could succeed.
But here's the thing. You can defeat an organization, but it's a lot harder to defeat an ideology. The victory was real, but it was temporary. And the violent opposition to equality, well, it was about to find new ways to reassert itself.
So how did it all fall apart? Well, Reconstruction didn't die from one single blow. It was more like death by 1,000 cuts, coming from all sides. On the ground, you had that relentless violence. In the North, the political will started to fade. People got tired, distracted by economic problems and scandals. And then, in the courts, even the Supreme Court started chipping away at the very amendments that were supposed to be the foundation of it all.
The whole experiment finally ended, not with some epic battle, but with a quiet, backroom political deal that basically traded away civil rights for the presidency.
So, the election of 1876 was a complete mess. So disputed it almost broke the country again. The solution was a political bargain. The Republicans could have the White House for their guy, Rutherford B. Hayes, but the price was steep. He had to agree to pull the last federal troops out of the South. And with them went any real federal protection for African Americans.
And once those troops were gone, this huge gap opened up between the words written in the Constitution and the lived reality on the ground. The promise of equal protection turned into the reality of Jim Crow segregation. The promise of the right to vote was erased by poll taxes and intimidation. And the promise of federal power to protect citizens was replaced by a return to state-level white supremacist rule.
So the failure of Grant's radical experiment wasn't just the end of an era. It was the start of a long, dark chapter, one that would cast a shadow over America for the next 100 years.
Because in the vacuum left behind, the whole system of Jim Crow was built. A society defined by legal segregation, by the economic trap of sharecropping, and by the constant, brutal threat of racial violence. It locked in a system of inequality so deep that it would take another century and a whole new civil rights movement to even start to undo the damage.
So, when we ask what was lost here, it's so much more than just a political fight. What was lost was a future, a vision of what America could have become, a vision that was won and then abandoned. Its failure put the nation on a much more painful path, and it raised these fundamental questions about power and equality and justice that really we are still wrestling with today.